Okay, so now we've gone through the very early pre-Greek civilization, and now we're going to focus in on the Greek civilization. And as I explained in the other videos, the islands that make up Greece and the mainland of Greece is not very good for farming, so the people are really getting their food from the sea, from fish and seafood, and they also become very good at building boats because of this. And they do travel and interact with the world around them because of this, more so than the pre-Greek civilizations. The two things that grow really well in Greece are olives and grapes. So we'll see the use of olive oil and the use of grapes, and particularly wine, very integral in the Greek civilization. And at its largest expanse, when it was under the rule of Alexander the Great, who actually came from Macedonia, the empire was everything that is shaded in the darker yellow color, this mustard color. So you can see that the Greek Empire was quite large in scale for this time period, much like the other civilizations that we've touched on, like the Persian civilization, for example. So we divide the Greek art up into a few different categories that we'll run through today, beginning with the geometric style. And the geometric style is named the geometric style because of the geometric forms that are found in the artwork, namely on the pieces of pottery that we have. And these are vessels that are particular shapes. There are certain shapes that were made and then used for specific things. So for example, this shape I'm showing you here is known as a crater. And this is very famous. This one is called the Dipylon, it's from the Dipylon Cemetery in Athens, and it dates to circa 750 to 735 BCE. So you can see this meandering geometric pattern at the top here, and this kind of thing is what is giving it its name. You have this zigzag or chevron pattern here, and then just like in the art of Egypt and the art what we looked at in Mesopotamia, the images are divided up into these bands, what we call registers. So here we have people in the top register, and they have this kind of triangle that is used for the torso. So again, very geometric in the way that it is created. And this is telling the story of this fallen warrior, this hero who has died in battle. So he's laid out here on this table. At this point, these early Greek people are not able to create images in perspective correctly. And so what we see here, it looks like two tables, but what they're trying to show is that the table is going back in the distance. And the animals under the table then are way too small, but they're trying to show that they're further away. The same with the person here in comparison to this person. It's just that, again, they're not getting the perspective correct. And perhaps, as we have seen in other depictions, maybe this person was not as important, so they could be slightly smaller. These are all women here, and they pull at their hair, which was a show of respect. When you went to someone's funeral, you were to pull at your hair and cry, lament over the dead person, and maybe pull out 2 or 3 strands of hair, not clumps of hair. You're pulling out a tiny bit of hair. There's a way of showing respect in their civilization. And then in the bottom register, we have warriors with chariots, and they're going into battle. Now the interesting thing that happens here is they're, again, not quite understanding perspective or how to show things one in front of another. So we have these weird horses that begin to appear that look like, here they have 3 heads and all these different legs. It's not some kind of mythological creature. It's 3 horses, and they just haven't figured out how to show 3 horses next to each other. So we have one body that is representing all 3 horses. And all of these early ceramics are made out of terracotta, which is a clay that is very abundant in Greece. And through, as I said in the, when we were looking at the piece that had the octopus on it, it's when they're fired, there's different times that the clay is exposed to air, and it oxidizes the clay, and we have this black kind of application that is developed, let's say. And I will show you a video, or there's a video up a little bit later that really walks you through that a little bit better and explains that. So next we have the Archaic period. And archaic really means like old, antiquated, you know, not good in a way. And this is really a time period that's mislabeled, because the Archaic period is our time period that we're getting Homer, the ancient blind poet, Aesop, who writes Aesop's fables, and many, many more really important figures from ancient Greece. In the Archaic period, we begin to see Greek architecture. And so here we have one of the first temples that we find, and the Greeks become really well known for their architecture. This is circa 500 to or 465 BCE. Now, the way that they create columns develops over the course of the history of Greece, and we'll look at those more closely in just a minute. But these would be the first kind of column that's developed by the ancient Greeks, known as a Doric column, and this is a Doric temple. And it just refers to the style of architecture that it was built in. The roof is missing. The roof would have come up into this triangular shape, and in the triangle would have been either paintings or carvings, and we'll be looking at some of those also in just a few minutes. The Doric column is, there's no real capital, it's very plain, there's no real base, it's very plain, but the interesting thing is they make it so that it comes out just the slightest bit right in the middle and then goes back in, so that visually when you look at it and you're standing and looking up at it, it looks correct in perspective. So really amazing that they're able to figure these things out. And so now we have a complex overview of the temple, and you'll see that it's not just a simple temple, that it's this whole complex that would be created. So we have the temple, and then we have an inner temple, and this little rectangle here represents the god or goddess that would have been there. So they would create a statue that represents the god or goddess, but they truly thought that that embodied that god or goddess. And the god or goddess was bathed and fed every day by the priests. And the priests are living over here. And you or I, as commoners, could come to the site and we would leave our offerings at the altar. We were not allowed to go into the temple. And then the priests would take our offerings, usually food or wine, and they would bring in and they would feed the image of the god or the goddess, because once again they believed that it really was the god or the goddess. Okay, so here are the 3 different styles of Greek architecture, and I have a video. It's a little long, but it's definitely worth watching. It explains it really well. So I already told you, here we have the Doric, and again, no real base to it, very simple up top. So that's the way, the capital is very simple. That's the way to remember that. And the drum, or this section, it's a little thicker and it goes out and then comes back in. We have some other things up here with the frieze and stuff, but let's just focus on the columns. Our next style is the Ionic order, and with the Ionic order you get a more complicated base, you get a narrowing or thinning of the column, you get the capital with this kind of fluted section, and the frieze will have more sculptural elements in it. That's just this long sculptural running elements in it. And our last is the Corinthian order. And the Corinthian order, again, has a slightly different base. The column becomes even thinner, and then it has this very interesting kind of capital that's based on canthus leaves, which is a plant that grew quite abundant in Greece. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and pick this up in the next video.